One man's journey from dad bod to oh god at the gym. Max was a good soul. Truly. He never wished anyone ill, was always ready to listen provided the speaker didn't ramble on, and had a genuine talent for finding the most comfortable position on the couch. His apartment was a fortress of comfort and his kitchen a branch of heaven on earth if heaven was considered a place where something fried, sweet, or perfectly paired with soda could always be found. His office job added a pleasant stillness to his life. 8 hours in front of a monitor, a lunch break with colleagues at the nearest pizza place, evenings relaxing with a TV show. Exercise? Well, he occasionally watched the Olympics on TV. That probably counted. His relationship with sports was, to put it mildly, chilly. The last time he ran was probably chasing a bus, and even that wasn't always successful. The word abs was associated in his mind solely with an abdominal crunch machine he'd seen in movies and cardio with a heart unit at the hospital. He accepted himself as he was, a little round, but there should be plenty of a good person, right? But fate, as it turned out, had other plans for Max. And they started with an unflattering photo. It was a group photo from some office event. Max saw it and for the first time in a long time realized that plenty could be that much. The angle was bad, the lighting harsh, and his double chin looked ready to live a life of its own. He clicked, zoomed in, clicked again. No, it wasn't Photoshop. It was him. His entire Cowchan culinary philosophy suddenly crumbled like brittle cookies. Shocked, he trudged to the closet. There, on the back shelf, they lay, the jeans of his skinny youth. A memento of times when chins were singular and t-shirts didn't cling to his belly as if he'd swallowed a watermelon. Max heroically attempted to put them on. The first leg went in relatively easily. The second with effort. The zipper. Oh, that treacherous metal serpent. It refused to close. At all. Not even by an inch. Max exhaled, sucked in his stomach, it seemed like a temporary fix, and tried again. The zipper merely clicked mockingly in response. Trying to button the waist felt like stringing a tune on an over-tightened guitar, about to snap. This was the second blow. The photo proof. The jeans, the verdict. No, echoed through the quiet apartment. This cannot continue. That evening, Max was seized by a determination that only strikes after severe shock or under the influence of advertising. He decided to change everything. Drastically. No half measures. He would become an athlete. Or at least a person who could zip up his jeans without risking the zipper's life. His gaze fell upon an advertisement for the coolest gym in town. The one where people from magazine covers went. With a pool, a spa, and presumably machines that worked your abs for you while you sipped a protein shake, Max had this impression. Without overthinking, he signed up for a year-long membership. A year. This was commitment with a capital C. There was no going back. And on top of this, he added a diet. Not just eat less, but something scientific, trendy, a little weird. His choice fell on the Kale Comet Cleanse, a made-up name for humor which involved consuming only green vegetables in liquid form until noon, and after that, something protein-based but tasteless and odorless. And, of course, a complete rejection of sugar, flour, fried food, salty food, and, well, everything Max loved. The next morning, Max stood before the mirror in a brand new tracksuit which unfortunately didn't make him visually leaner but at least was a fashionable color. He had a green smoothie for breakfast which tasted like liquid grass with a hint of despair. This was just the beginning. The first workout at Cool Zone Gym was unforgettable. Against the backdrop of perfect bodies moving with the grace of panthers, Max felt like a clumsy hippo. He tried to mimic an exercise on the treadmill, but instead of a light jog, he produced a breathless flailing of limbs. Lifting dumbbells didn't inspire a desire to build muscle, but rather a desire to call a doctor. After 10 minutes, he felt as if he had unloaded a train car of coal, although he had only done a few hesitant sets on the lightest machines. Walking out of the gym, red, sweaty, and with muscles aching even in places he didn't know existed, Max understood one thing. The childhood dream of an easy transformation into Apollo had crashed against the hard rock of reality. An adult body that had been pampered with burgers and sitting for years. But the membership was bought. The diet had begun and was already hated. There seemed to be no going back. The adventure Operation Apollo had begun. And it promised to be very painful and comical. For the first 3 days after the epic decision, Max moved exclusively with a waddle. Like a wounded penguin. Everything hurt. Absolutely everything. Even muscles whose existence he hadn't suspected now demanded his attention in the form of a dull ache. The green smoothie for breakfast only amplified the feeling of suffering. It didn't satisfy, but left a strange aftertaste that Max mentally dubbed the taste of surrender. But the membership was bought. At the coolest GYM, there was no turning back. Gathering his willpower and trying not to wince from the pain in that very will, Max shuffled to his second workout. Cool Zone Gym lived up to its name. Everything here screamed success, strength, and perfection. Gleaming machines resembling torture devices from outer space, floor-to-ceiling mirrors reflecting people who looked like they'd stepped off the cover of Fitness for Goddesses and Gods. The scent of expensive air freshener mixed with the smell of sweat. And something else, perhaps ambition. Max felt like an alien here. In his brand new tracksuit, he still looked like a potato in a sack compared to these sculpted bodies in minimalist athletic wear. He timidly shuffled towards the treadmill area, where people moved with such grace and speed as if they were being chased by zombie models. His attempt to set the speed on the treadmill resulted in him almost flying off it. He had to frantically hit buttons until the machine stopped, leaving Max red-faced and breathless after 5 seconds of cardio. The next victim was the stationary bike. While trying to adjust the seat, Max almost fell over with the machine. When he finally managed to sit on it, he found his knees were hitting his ears. Something with the adjustment had gone wrong. A woman sat next to him, pedaling with the face of a Buddhist monk, achieving nirvana at 25 miles per hour. Max felt even more insignificant. He decided to try a group class, easy stretching for dummies. What could possibly go wrong? The instructor, a woman named Stella, radiated so much energy and positivity that Max wanted to hide under the mat. "Feel your body. Open yourselves to the world," she shouted, bending into impossible knots. Max tried to follow, but his body, it seemed, had closed itself off from the world and refused to open. An attempt to touch his toes ended in a comical tumble and a quiet groan. A few people nearby stifled smiles. Among the other attendees, a man in his 40s named Arnold, or so Max mentally nicknamed him, particularly stood out. He was huge, all muscle, and exclusively worked with massive weights, emitting strange sounds that resembled the groans of a wounded bear. His face was constantly strained, as if he were solving nuclear physics equations with every rep. Arnold never smiled and seemed to consider anyone lifting less than the weight of their own car to be an insect. Max tried to stay far away from him. The Kale Comet Cleanse diet also held its ground in absurdity. Lunch that day consisted of boiled chicken breast without salt and steamed broccoli. It wasn't food. It was punishment. Max looked at his colleagues hungrily eating burgers and felt like a martyr at the stake of healthy eating. His stomach rumbled as if protesting and demanding an immediate return to the usual diet. Returning home after his second workout, Max was exhausted, hungry, and dejected. He didn't feel leaner, stronger, or healthier. He felt like a wreck who had spent a fortune on a membership and was now forced to suffer in the company of perfect people. His childhood dream of an easy transformation was crashing not just against a rock, but against a granite machine at Cool Zone Gym. But he had taken the second step. Painful, awkward, but a step. And ahead lay new workouts, new green smoothies, and new comical situations in this unfamiliar world of steel and ideal bodies. A month had passed. A month of muscle soreness, a month of green haze before his eyes from hunger and maybe overexertion, a month of awkward attempts to fit into the world of Cool Zone Gym. Max hadn't gotten any leaner. At least not visibly. He feared the scale like the plague and avoided it, pretending to admire his reflection, which still resembled a potato but perhaps not in such a tight sack anymore. Workouts remained a trial. Stella, the Energizer Bunny trainer, seemed to get only more energetic. Her positivity was blinding to Max, who could barely shuffle his feet after the warm-up. He still fell during easy stretching. On the treadmill, he could now run a whole minute without risking a catapult launch, but then his lungs demanded to abandon ship. Arnold, the bear from the free weights zone, still looked at Max like an insect, especially when he tried to lift dumbbells Max mentally called toddler weights. The Kale Comet Cleanse diet became a source of constant suffering and comical situations. Max tried to cook healthy food at home. His first attempt at preparing quinoa resulted in a substance resembling glue with a hint of despair. Trying to bake a chicken breast to juiciness made it resemble a rubber sole. And making a smoothie every morning turned into a ritual of voluntary torture by blender. The hardest part was social life. Lunch with colleagues turned into agony. While they ate burgers and pizza, Max would pull out his container of boiled chicken and bland broccoli. "Wow, Max, you're on a diet now," colleagues would ask, their eyes clearly saying, "How long will this last?" He tried to explain about the Kale Comet Cleanse, but it usually ended in laughter or confusion. Evenings with friends became a test of will. "Come on, Max, what's one slice of pizza going to do? Here, try these chips, they have a new flavor." Max refused, feeling like a black sheep and mentally cursing his decision. One time, he finally caved. He snuck to the fridge in the middle of the night and ate a piece of sausage, feeling like an international criminal. The next day, it wasn't the guilt that bothered him as much as the heartburn, which he had already gotten out of the habit of having. There were also comical attempts to exercise outside the gym. Max decided that running in the park was the real deal. His first appearance on the park's running path caused a slight stir among the seniors doing Nordic walking. His panting was probably audible on the next street, and his awkward movements raised concerns that he might trip over his own feet. Despite all this suffering and comical failures, there was something that kept him going. Perhaps stubbornness. Perhaps the fear of admitting defeat to himself and, worse, to that unflattering photo and those unfortunate genes. And perhaps he felt tiny, barely perceptible changes. He no longer got winded climbing to the third floor. He could walk a little more steps in a day without feeling completely drained. These microscopic victories were like breadcrumbs to a starving man, barely satisfying but offering hope. He was still far from Apollo. Very far. His body still protested against any exertion and his stomach demanded its usual comforts. But he persevered. Comical situations accompanied him daily, turning life into a realistic sitcom about a man trying to become a better version of himself through pain, sweat, and green smoothies. The road was long, thorny, but Max was slowly, awkwardly, but surely moving along it. 2 months had passed. 2 long, painful months. Max still went to Cool Zone Gym, but his motivation was slowly fading like a campfire that someone forgot to add logs to. His progress was so minimal that it seemed only the scales at the gym knew about it, and they were probably laughing. The jeans of his youth still lay in the closet as a silent reproach and an unattainable dream. The green smoothie no longer caused despair. Now it just caused melancholy. Max no longer fell during easy stretching, which was a certain achievement. But he still couldn't touch his toes, not even his knees, while others were already tying themselves into knots. His running on the treadmill had turned into a persistent but slow shuffle, resembling an attempt to walk against a strong wind. Arnold, the bear, still didn't seem to notice his existence, which was probably for the best. The main comedy at this stage lay in the chasm between the grand goal, run some distance, or become almost Apollo, and the pathetic reality. Max, looking at himself in the gym mirror, saw the same familiar potato, perhaps just a little more tired. The thought of a marathon triggered hysterical laughter, to himself of course, so as not to disturb the gym gods. He realized that his initial plan was about as realistic as flying to the moon in an office chair. One evening, after a particularly unsuccessful workout, when even lifting his own gym bag felt like an Olympic standard, Max sat in the locker room feeling utterly defeated. A man sat down next to him who didn't look as perfect as the others, a little overweight, with a kind face, who always seemed to be competing against himself on one of the machines. It was Gary, whom Max had seen there almost every day. "Tough, huh?" Gary smiled. Max could only nod, trying to catch his breath. "I started like this too," Gary continued. "Thought I'd drop everything and become Apollo in a month, right? Dream on. The first few weeks I thought I'd die right here, on this bench." Max raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Someone else went through this hell?" Gary said he'd been working out for 2 years. There were results, but slow. There were relapses, there were moments when he wanted to quit everything. But he kept going because movement is life, and sitting on the couch is just sitting on the couch. His words weren't pompous, they were realistic. And that made Max feel a little better. "And this, Kale Comet Cleanse?" Gary asked, nodding at Max's empty container. "I once lived on kefir for a week. Felt like a kefir zombie." Max laughed. For the first time in a long time, his laughter at the gym wasn't caused by his own clumsy fall. He told Gary about his successes, About the jeans, about the photo. Gary listened, nodded, shared his own comical stories of failure. It was a conversation not about perfect bodies, but about real people just trying to be a little better. This conversation became an unexpected moment of truth for Max. Maybe it wasn't about becoming Apollo in record time. Maybe it was about the process itself, about trying, about taking small steps, even if they were painful and awkward. Maybe it was important to just keep going, even if the result wasn't as impressive as in the pictures online. He still felt like a potato, but now he knew there were other potatoes nearby who were also trying to become, well, maybe just baby potatoes. It didn't take away the muscle ache or make the green smoothie taste better, but it added a touch of humanity and acceptance of reality to this comical journey. The dream of Apollo was distant, but the path, though thorny and funny, no longer seemed pointless. Another few weeks passed. Max continued to go to the gym, drink his green smoothie with less enthusiasm but out of habit, and even learned to do a few exercises without risking life and limb to others. His chats with Gary had become regular. They shared combat stories and supported each other in the difficult fight against laziness and extra pounds. Arnold remained a distant figure from the world of heavy weights. An event was approaching that had become Max's unofficial goal, since he realized the absurdity of a marathon. The annual charity Trot 5K run. The office organized it, and participation was a semi-mandatory, semi-voluntary tradition. Previously, Max had always found brilliant excuses, but this year he decided to run. This was his great trial, his chance to show, primarily himself, that he hadn't suffered for nothing over the past months. Preparation for the Turtle Trot consisted of increasing his treadmill running time to 7 minutes and attempting short distances in the park, which ended in breathlessness and the desire to call a taxi. Gary encouraged him, telling funny stories about his first races that ended in cramps and disorientation. The day of the Turtle Trot arrived. The morning was cool and sunny. Colleagues gathered at the starting line, some in professional gear, some in funny costumes, some, like Max, with an expression of doom on their faces. Max was in his new tracksuit, which still didn't make him leaner, but at least didn't restrict his movements as much. The start gun fired. The crowd moved forward. The first 100 yards Max ran with enthusiasm, even overtaking a few people who were walking. "I can do it. I'm running." Operation Apollo is a success, his inner voice triumphed. But then reality caught up. His lungs refused to cooperate, his legs turned to jelly, and sweat poured into his eyes. The enthusiasm deflated like a punctured tire. He switched to a brisk walk, then to a slow walk. Colleagues jogged past, some looking at him in surprise, others throwing sympathetic glances. Max felt like a real turtle competing with gazelles. His internal monologue turned into a stream of suffering and humorous observations. Who invented running for fun? My knees have filed a petition with the Hague Tribunal. I think I can see yesterday's broccoli evaporating from me. I'm going to trip now and pretend it was planned. It's part of the warm-up. At one point, he saw Gary, running a little ahead, not very fast either, but more steadily than Max. Gary turned, winked, and shouted, "Keep going, Max. The finish line is just around the corner, if that corner is really far away." It made Max smile and gave him a little boost. The funniest thing happened at the hydration station. Max, exhausted, reached for a cup of water, but with trembling hands, knocked over an entire table of water. The volunteers just sighed, and Max turned red and shuffled on, feeling like the epicenter of chaos at a charity event. The last mile was pure torture. His legs refused to move, his whole body ached. He could see the finish line, but it seemed as unattainable as those jeans in his closet. He heard the encouraging shouts of volunteers, but they sounded like mockery. Finally, crossing the finish line, Max didn't feel triumph. He felt the urge to lie down right there, on the asphalt, and never move again. He was red, sweaty, his hair stuck to his forehead, and his breathing resembled a steam engine. He didn't run the 5 kilometers, he almost crawled it. It was far from an Apollonian achievement. It was a funny, painful, and completely realistic completion of his first run. He didn't win. He wasn't even among the first. But he did it. He ran, well, walked most of 5 kilometers. This was his great trial. It turned out comical, exhausting, and not at all as heroic as he had imagined. But he completed it. And that was something. Now he just had to figure out what that something meant for his Operation Apollo. After crossing the finish line of the Turtle Trot, Max collapsed onto the nearest patch of grass, ignoring the surprised looks. His lungs felt like they were trying to exit his chest, his muscles trembled, and his only desire was for someone to bring him a bucket of water and the nearest couch. This wasn't the triumphal arch of Apollo, but rather a pile of ruins after a barbarian invasion. A few days passed. The muscle soreness was monumental, but it no longer scared him as much as it had in the first weeks. It was a familiar pain, the pain of progress, albeit turtle paste. Max finally dared to step on the scales. And he saw a result. Not 40 pounds gone and a six-pack, no. But a significant portion of that plenty he'd seen in the photo was gone. He had lost weight. Not a lot, but noticeably. And lo and behold, those notorious jeans, they zipped up. Not loosely, but without risking the metal zipper's life. It wasn't an Apollonian triumph, but a small, very realistic victory for Max. After the run, he talked with Gary. "So, Max, how was our beginner's marathon?" Gary laughed. Max told him about his suffering, his fall near the water station, his inner monologue. Gary listened, nodded, and shared his own equally comical stories of failure. "The main thing is you didn't quit," Gary said before leaving. "And that you started. A lot of people don't even take the first step." Max understood. It wasn't about transforming into an ancient statue in 3 months. It was about the journey, about trying, about challenging his habits and fears. His Operation Apollo had failed as an attempt at instant transformation, but it had succeeded as the beginning of something new. He didn't continue the Kale Comet Cleanse. That was too cruel. But he started eating more consciously, adding more vegetables and reducing the amount of fast food. He didn't move into Cool Zone Gym, but the membership wasn't wasted. He went there a few times a week, working out without fanaticism, but regularly. He even found some strange satisfaction in the slow but steady pace on the treadmill. Max was still far from an Apollo body. Very far. His physique remained earthly. But now it was a little lighter and, most importantly, more functional. He no longer got winded on stairs, could walk a much greater distance, and even occasionally felt something resembling energy. One evening, Max was sitting on his couch, but this time he wasn't eating pizza, but baked chicken with a salad. Next to him lay a pair of those very jeans, zipped up. He looked at his reflection in the window, not perfect, but no longer the one from that unfortunate photo. The dream of Apollo had transformed. It stopped being an unattainable ideal and became a path to a healthier, more active, and, as it turned out, a more comical and interesting life. Max laughed, remembering himself at the start of the run or his culinary experiments. It was his realistic comedy, his small victory over the couch. He didn't become a god, but he became a better version of himself. With a smile, and with jeans that zip up,